Hello, guys. It is the Writers Tribe Talk Show. I'm your host, Elsa Kurt, and today I have Dr. Patricia Daly Lipe. I said it wrong. Look at that. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm really excited to talk to you about your books today. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Wonderful. So you're not
International Women's Day too. So thank you for having me on this day.
What a perfect day for this, right? Great day for it to talk.
I appreciate it. I'm honored.
Thank you. I get to talk to a very accomplished, very prolific and eclectic even author, award-winning author you are. So that's very exciting. I loved seeing the variety of works that you have. So before we talk about your newest release or your upcoming release, I want to kind of go back a little bit and tell me a little bit about the history or the evolution of your books, because you have history books and so some other type of books as well. So let's start with your first book. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, my first book happened because I was teaching in Annapolis. I have for several years a course called Myth, Magic, and Metaphor. And when I moved back to the West Coast, to La Jolla, California, Richard Lederer, who has a show called A Way with Words, Richard got in touch with me and he said, Patricia, you need to write a book about that course you gave in Annapolis. So Myth, Magic, and Metaphor became a book. And that was my first book. And then I was writing for the newspaper in La Jolla, the history, because I grew up in La Jolla and Washington, D.C., but most of my childhood was in La Jolla, California. I'm bi-coastal. I grew up on both sides. But I was writing for the Beach and Bay Press, La Jolla Village News, and they wanted to have the history of La Jolla. And so every week it was like being back in college. You know, you had to have a finished product on Friday for them to publish on the history. And so someone else came up to me and said, you know, you need to put those, well, actually it was the publisher came to me and said, we want to make a book out of the articles that you've been writing. So fine. So I put together like 900 pages and they said, no, we want much more. It took me a long time to pull it back, make it smaller. My husband integrated the photographs into the text. And then it was published, and that was La Jolla, a celebration of its past, which is
beautiful.
Okay. So, but the book sold for $19.95. What do you think I got?
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yes, it's painful.
Okay, I got $1.12. Since then, I have used an attorney who's a literary attorney, and I won't sign a contract unless he reads it first. Because when he saw that contract, he said, I would not have allowed you to sign that. So yeah. I learned the hard way. And then eventually they stopped promoting the book. And so it was called Sunbelt Publications. And so we bought them out on all the La Jolla books that they had. So now I have several cartons of the La Jolla book. If anybody is interested, I don't sell them for $19.95. I sell them for half that price. You know, and I don't charge for shipping. So it's quite a deal. And it's quite an interesting book because the articles, you know, used their photographs of famous people who lived in La Jolla and how La Jolla came to be. It's an overview of La Jolla. And so that was my my first experience with that. But writing actually began in Washington, D.C. when I came back from Europe. I have a degree from the Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium. It's a degree in Thomistic philosophy, a diplôme en philosophie thomiste. And I went to live in Paris after that. And then I went to research my mother's life in Paris because she had lived there between World War I and World War II, which became another book. And I did research, and since I speak French, I was able to interview people and get to meet people who knew her. My mother died when I was only 18 years old, and so she didn't tell me about her life before I was born, and I had to research to find out, and that's what became the book, A Cruel Calm, Paris Between the Wars, and that's this one.
Oh, beautiful.
And that's a picture from what was her apartment looking from the Ile Saint Louis, looking at Notre Dame. And then I went to live in Rome, and then to meet my great uncle William. And the other book that ended up evolving from that was this one,
Wow.
Patriot Priest. He didn't tell me anything about serving the troops in World War I, but I found out after he died, and I was asked to write a book about him, what he had done during World War I. But anyway, the story is that I came back from Rome. I've been speaking French, and then I've been speaking Italian. I came back to Washington, D.C., and my first job was writing for the Evening Star newspaper. And I was supposed to answer the phone, and the reporter would be on the other end of the line, and they would be full of energy, and there'd be a fire, there'd be a death, or there'd be something incredible happening in the background, and they were speaking so quickly, I had to ask them to repeat. Well, when you're in the middle of a crisis, you don't want to repeat. And the reason I had them repeat is because many of them were from the South. And yes, English is my first language, but I can't understand the Southern accent. I can't even understand it today. I still can't understand the Southern accent. So they put me in a different category.
Okay.
At the Evening Star. Where do you think they put me?
I can't guess. Tell me.
Obituary.
Oh, no. Oh,
But as a result of that, I ended up meeting some very interesting people, and some of them it was during segregation. Some of them were in a neighborhood that was all Black. And I got to meet families that I wouldn't have gotten to know otherwise, and interviewed them about whoever their past one, whoever their person who died was, and wrote the obituary about that person. And I love talking to people. And so that opened up another realm for me, because interviewing people and getting to know the personal perspective on history. And when someone in the family died, you get the personal perspective from their family members of what they did during their lifetime, and gives you a perspective on a time and a place. And it was fascinating work. It sounded kind of spooky, but it really was very interesting to meet these families. And then I ended up moving back to California, and that's the next story. So
well, I mean, so that's all incredible in and of itself. Your own personal history, or your search for your family's history, had to have been just so amazing. And to capture that all in a book, in a story, is such a gift for your future generations too, not just for yourself, but for your whole family too. How amazing and emotional that journey must have been for you to learn about your mother's and your uncle's life in those ways, and then to put those stories down on paper like that. That had to be quite a journey for you to do that.
Well, it's the journey. That's the fun, is the journey. It's not the result, it's the journey. It's the process.
Absolutely.
And I love doing the research. It's fascinating. The letters that he wrote to his sister, who was my grandmother, because of my great uncle, not my uncle, but my great uncle. The letters he wrote to his sister are in the archives at Georgetown University. So I went to Georgetown and I got to read. Now you try reading the handwriting from that era. It's very hard to read.
Yes.
My daughter helped me. One of my daughters helped me read and even she had trouble. It was really, but I put as much as I could of some of the letters in the book. So he was in the front lines of the Battle of Picardy, and writing to his sister and what it was like and what he was going through. And it talk about the personal perspective. I mean, it gives you a first person view of World War I. And when he came back to Washington, D.C., because my mother's family were from Washington, D.C. When he came back to the family in Washington, D.C., he was proclaimed the Patriot Priest of Picardy. So that's why I called it Patriot Priest, my book. And they paraded him down Pennsylvania Avenue as the Patriot Priest of Picardy.
Wow. Yeah, that's an incredible cover. That's obviously him. Yes.
That's him on the cover, in his uniform.
That's amazing.
And he served with several popes. He actually was the only American canon of St. Peter's in Rome, and he didn't represent the United States. He represented the Knights of Malta to the Holy See because he was a Knight of Malta.
Wow.
And so he had a diplomatic as well as a religious view or job, if you will, in the Vatican. So
Wow.
he was very interesting. And I had dinner one night with the King and Queen of Denmark. Their daughter had just married King Constantine of Greece. And talk about scary. I mean,
I couldn't even imagine.
I went to Elizabeth Arden. I had my face done. Then I went back to my apartment and washed my face and said, no, I want to just be me. And then I practiced doing a curtsy.
Oh
and
my
then when I
goodness.
got to my great uncle's apartment, I was ready to do the curtsy, and the Queen just put out her hand to shake hands.
Wow.
They were
Oh,
so nice. They were so nice to me, and I was a nervous wreck, but they were so nice. And the funny thing was, what do you do when the king spills his water?
pretend not to notice. I don't know. What do you do?
Exactly. Yes.
I was right.
Yes. You were right. You just kind of keep talking, look the other way, keep talking. And my great uncle pushed the buzzer under the table, and Candido, who worked for my great uncle, he came out from the kitchen and cleaned it up, and we all just kept talking and looking
Wow.
anywhere.
I'm so excited that I was right. It's the
You
little
were
thing.
right. You passed the test. You can go
Yeah.
meet the king.
I could meet the king. How about that? Yeah, I would probably literally fall flat on my face, and yeah, it would be very awkward. I can guarantee you did a much better job than I could have ever dreamed
I
of.
kept my mouth shut.
Yes. And when in
Which
doubt, right? When
It's
in
not
doubt.
my style, but I did. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. So now not only are you an author, you're also an artist. Do you mind telling me a little bit about your artwork?
Yes. When I was little, we had an older lady in La Jolla who used to take us as kids, and we'd sit by the ocean and paint what we saw with the surf coming in and the waves, and we learned to use watercolor and sketching, and then I entered several contests when I was in La Jolla as a child at the art gallery, and then later on, I just decided, I just love doing this. And I did portraits for people. I did portraits of horses, of children, of dogs. And, and I would sell them. And, that was part of what I was doing. And the cover of two of my books has, this is one.
How beautiful.
That just kind of came on its own. And then Myth, Magic, and Metaphor has this picture. That's the Princess and the Unicorn. And it's more, if you know what surrealism is, it's more surrealistic. It's where you let the paint take over, and then whatever's in your brain just hiding away. This is an example.
Oh, how lovely.
I mean, I didn't plan any of these animals. They were in the paint. They just came out on their own. How did they come out on their own? Well, somewhere in here, there was a picture, and it was enough to just let it evolve and come out. And that's what surrealism is to allow your subconscious to take over, and then your creativity gets involved. And
I love that.
I love doing that, but I also do plein air paintings. I went to France and lived in Provence for a summer and did many of my paintings in Provence. And when I came back to the United States, it took me 2 months to be able to use my eyes. The sun in Provence in the summer is so strong. And when you're out there, you don't want to wear dark glasses because you want to paint what you see with the right colors. And so, with all that heavy sunlight on my eyes, it took me a while to recover, but it was worth it. I just love living. I was in Lacoste, which is in Provence. And I loved living there. The people were lovely. The food was delicious. And, it was great.
What incredible, incredible experiences. And then you get to relay them through your various artistry, whether it's your writing or through actual painting. What a gift, what a blessing to have such opportunities like that. That's incredible. And to share them. I think it's very generous and gracious to share those gifts in that way and let other
That's what
people
they're
experience.
for. A gift is to share. It's not to
Yes.
hold.
Absolutely. So, so true. And now, another thing that you do, because I did my homework on you, is that you, I know all good things, of course,
Okay.
is that you, a woman after my own heart, is you're a nature lover, you love animals. You even
Yes.
have rescued thoroughbred horses at one
Yes.
point, correct?
Yes. I still do. And
Oh, look how gorgeous. Oh, so beautiful.
that's the barn we had when we were in Virginia, actually. But inside, the pictures were all taken here. Uh, I raced horses in California. I used to raise thoroughbreds, and I was lucky enough. People thought I was crazy because in those days, I was a single parent. My kids were 3, 5, and 6, or three, no, 2, 4, and 5 when I became a single parent. And so I raised my kids by myself, and everybody thought I was crazy that I was going to have horses. What? And I said, well, these are thoroughbreds, and I'm going to probably race one. And they, crazy. Well, my first horse, I was also showing horses. I used to jump fences and go to horse shows as hunters and jumpers. And in those days, you only rode thoroughbreds. And they're coming back. A lot of warm bloods now, but their thoroughbreds are coming back to the hunters and jumpers. But in those days, you only rode thoroughbreds. And I decided to breed one of my mares and have a racehorse. And a friend of mine's husband was Eddie Gregson, and he was a trainer of racehorses. And so when the foal was born, and when she was old enough, my friend said, take her over for my husband to see what he thinks. He liked her. Her name was Patty Patron. Patty because of me, and Patron because her sire was Patron. Patty Patron ended up racing at Santa Anita, Hollywood Park, and Del Mar, and won at all 3.
Wow, that's incredible.
People thought I was crazy. But then they started making bets on her, and they made money on her. So I wasn't crazy.
Not so
And,
crazy after all.
and her son, I ended up breeding her later, and her son was Risky Ronnie. Guess why?
I'm drawing a blank.
Ronnie Reagan, Ronald Reagan.
Of course. Oh, of
Risky
course.
Ronnie was born right at the foot of the mountain in San Ynez Valley, right at the
Oh,
foot of the mountain where Ronald Reagan's house was.
oh, I love that. That's wild.
So Risky Ronnie ended up winning too. He didn't run and he didn't race until he was 4 years old because he was immature and I didn't want him to hurt himself. But when he did race, he won.
Wow, you
Yeah.
have the knack, you have the skill. It's certainly not luck. It's obviously a skill that you have, an intuition, I'm guessing, right?
Thank you. I'll take it.
I appreciate the modesty, so I'm going to say it again. That's a skill, ma'am. That's really awesome. I love that.
Okay. Thank you.
A little bit envious too. I think, how great to be.
These 2 horses that wrote this book, I had to translate what they told me, but these 2, when we moved to Florida, we have rescued 12 thoroughbreds, and these 2 said, you're not finding a home for us. If you're moving, we're going with you. One is 22 years old and the other one is 24 years old. They won't leave me.
No, those are
So they wrote a book about their story so that people can read the book and understand what they were subjected to. I mean, why were they rescued? What had they done? And that's their story.
You said something that, all us writers can relate to, that we don't tell the stories, they tell them to us. We just write them down. We just take notes and do the best we can. And right.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of that, kind of in that same vein, your stories, your books, do you feel like they pick you or you pick them, the stories that are going to be told?
They have picked me over and over. Like, as I told you with the La Jolla book, because I got the phone call saying, we love the articles you're writing for the newspaper, we want a book. Well, that's how that one happened. Then somebody, for my great uncle, they said, you met your great uncle in Rome. Have you written about him? So that's another, I have, 5 different publishers. And then I redid them, and that's another story. And so now I have a new publication, putting it in my own name as Literary Lady Publications. But originally there were 5 different publishers who all came to me for different reasons to write a book. The only one that they didn't come to me was Nature's Wisdom. Those are a collection of short stories about animals in the high seas that were all published in different magazines. And someone said, put them together in a book, and that's what that one is. So all of my books are different. They all
I love
have
that.
Yeah, I'm looking.
I find that very relatable. I find that I can't really commit to just one genre or one lane that, much like you said, that the books pick you.
Well, mine are nonfiction. The only one that is anywhere near fiction is A Cruel Calm, because my mother's not alive to tell me if I got it right. But I got my PhD doing research for that book, actually. Paris Between the Wars was a fascinating era. I mean, she had James Joyce in the apartment above hers on the Ile Saint Louis.
Wow.
I mean, so I had to read all of James Joyce to be able to have him speak in his own words.
Wow.
And, and then we have a relative who was related to one of the people in the book. I don't need to get into all of that. But anyway, there was, there was a lot of research that was needed for that. But it was when Paris was the cultural capital of the world, despite the fact that the First World War had ended and the Second World War was just in the background, just ready to explode. And just before it totally exploded, my mother was able to leave Paris. Her boat took her to Portugal, where she took the Pan American when it took off from the ocean. So she flew the Pan American airplane and landed off the coast of Long Island. And so she was able to leave in 1939.
That's
but it was just wow.
Yeah.
Anyway,
how long did that book take you to write?
Oh, that took 2.5, 3 years.
Yeah. I would imagine the level of research.
I was doing the research. I went back to Paris a couple of times to interview people. I met people who had known my mother, actually, and was able to speak to them. And then when I was a little girl, my mother had taken me to Fontaine-les-Nonnes, where I met the Comtesse Carl Costa de Beauregard, whose son became my mother's beau. But I'm not going to give away the story, but it's true. And we're hoping, my son has written a screenplay based on that book, and we're just hoping that someone will make a movie of it, because Lindbergh arrived, the spirit of St. Louis. He flew in, he went around the Eiffel Tower a few times trying to figure out where's the airport, and then, saw all the lights in the distance, and he realized that he had to go outside of Paris to get to Le Bourget Airport, and all the crowds that were there greeting him. And I had my mother as one of those members, had her in that crowd. I believe she was, actually. And, to interview members of the Lindbergh family also, to be able to put information there that has not been written before about Lindbergh's flight across the ocean. That's in the book too, because it was part of my research.
That's incredible.
An amazing era, just amazing.
And to have captured it like that, I'm excited to read it. That sounds like such a fabulous, fascinating book in every way. Now tell me, so now your most recent release is Miami's Yesteryears. Is that correct? Is that the most recent release?
It's the most recent, but the newest book is not out yet, but it's been written. Miami's Yesteryears.
Beautiful.
Now, that's not on my mother's side, that's on my father's side. My parents were divorced when I was 10. I didn't get to know my father until after my mother died, and then I got to know him. And this book is based on someone I never met, who was my grandfather. So it was my father's father. And he went down in 1904 to this place called Miami. And did you know that Miami was actually named and began because of a woman? And this is International Women's Day, so.
How about that?
You know, so, but I won't give it away. It's in the book.
Yes, fair enough. Yes, just give us that little bit of a tease. So now we have to go get the book and get the details.
But my grandfather went down in 1904 and he saw potential. And then in 1911, he moved his family from St. Louis, Missouri by car. And his car is on the back of the book. That's his car.
Very cool.
And he drove the family through the Everglades. Wow. And my father wrote about that. So I put what my father wrote in the book about going through and getting stuck and how terrifying it was when his father had to go find somebody to help them get unstuck because there weren't major roads yet. You got stuck in the mud in the Everglades and you're surrounded with trees. I mean, palm trees. And what are we going to do? And my grandmother apparently was just terrified. And my father wrote all about that and how finally my grandfather returned and he had some Indians with him who helped move the car out of the mud so they could continue their journey down to Miami. And when he was in Miami, he would take people out in a boat and he'd point in the water and say, "This is where you're going to live." In the water.
Wow.
He dredged and created Palm Island, Hibiscus Island, Point View. He created them.
That's
and
just
people
incredible.
stopped thinking he was crazy when millionaires decided to build these beautiful, expensive homes on those islands.
He was a visionary.
Yes, he saw paradise in the future.
That's what an amazing story. And thank you to your great grandfather, because I mean, I love Florida. Grandfather.
Oh,
sorry, thank you.
Grandfather.
Just grandfather.
Yeah, my father's father. Yes.
Father's father. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you to him for that.
Well, he worked with Flagler on the Tamiami Trail also. And so I talk about Flagler in the book and how he extended the highway down because there wasn't one. So eventually that's another story in the book about highways. And Mr. Collins putting a highway and developing Miami Beach and so forth. But Mr. Flagler put a bridge across, which is no longer there, but to connect to the Keys, the Florida Keys.
Okay.
And I mean, that in itself is a whole chapter in the book. It's just amazing what they went through doing that, you know. So the research, I love the research. It's fascinating. When you go to places like Miami, if you know some of the past, you know, then you can look around and see a little bit more than, you know.
I appreciate people like you who love doing the research, because I love reading things like this, but I don't necessarily love doing the research. So thank you for being someone that will do it for me. Okay, so what can you, if you can tell me anything, what can you tell me about your next book, the one that's going to be released next? Can you give us any little?
Yes, it's called How She Did It, and it's based on my mother-in-law's life. My husband and I, he was my first boyfriend in La Jolla, California, but then he married somebody else because he's 5 years older than I am. So, you know, he was already further into his life. And years later, as here I was single all those years, and I went back to California and a mutual friend said, "Do you have email?" And I said, "Well, yes." And he said, "Do you remember Steele Lipe?" "Oh, yes." And he said, "I will give you his email. You can email him and get in touch." And I said, "But he's married, isn't he?" And he said, "Not anymore."
Ooh.
Oh, okay. So I emailed and I said, "A voice from the past." Do you know what he did?
What did he do?
He called up his friend and he said, "Who is she?"
That was not what I was expecting to hear.
No, I mean, it was many years ago, and you know, but one thing led to another, and he reintroduced himself to me. Then he was up in Sacramento, California. I was in La Jolla, so he came down to San Diego, took me out to dinner. He was a nervous wreck and had, I don't know how many margaritas. You know? Oh. And, but one thing led to another, and here we are. We've been married for 24 years.
Oh, beautiful.
And I'm very lucky to have him. And his mother and I were best friends. His mother lived to be almost 103.
Wow.
So the newest book is about his mother, who was, quote, the living legend of La Jolla. She was an artist. She started out as a medical illustrator at Vanderbilt University, which is where my husband graduated. He was a doctor. My husband was a doctor, and his father was our family physician. I knew my husband's father way before I knew him. He was our doctor. And, but his mother studied at Vanderbilt University Medical School, and she was a medical illustrator. And she would lean over the, surgeon, and she would have to draw what was inside the body. They
Wow.
didn't have, the x-rays and the cameras that they have now. So her job was to draw what was happening in there as the surgeon was doing his work. I mean, so she had to be precise.
Yeah.
And she took that precision and she would draw beautiful neighborhoods all over, well, La Jolla, San Diego, all over and then she traveled, after her husband died, she traveled all over the world and drew pictures and then made watercolors out of the pictures. So she had the exact thing with the drawing, but when she got to watercolor, it's what you leave out, which is more important than what you put in watercolor. And she was able to do that. And her philosophy of art is written in her notebooks that we inherited after she died. And I have used the philosophy of art and her thoughts as she traveled to different places about her paintings and about art and its relationship to the world in the book. And so you not only get her life story in the beginning, but then you get her paintings and her drawings and her philosophical insight. And it's
That's
called
so
How
exciting.
She Did It.
How She Did It. That sounds absolutely fantastic. Do you have a release date for that one yet or not yet?
If the book is finished, the publication should be within the month.
Oh my God, that's so exciting.
It should be before the end of the month that we'll have it available.
That is fantastic. And that is your 11th book, correct?
Yes,
That's
yes.
very, very, very exciting. But you are such an incredibly fascinating woman that I would love to have your memoir, your life. This is it right here. That's you.
That's the book I wrote about my experience living in Europe in the 60s. And
Aha.
it's amazing when I read some of the things I wrote at that point in my life. I can't believe that was me. I mean, because what I want people to do is what I did then. I kept a notebook, a journal. I integrated what I wrote in the journal into this book.
Oh, beautiful.
And I was able to put it together because I had done that. So my request for anybody who's watching this is that they keep a journal, because the next generation won't understand what we're going through. Write about your thoughts, write about what you see, write about what you feel. And the next generation, they can learn from the past. If you can't learn from the past, you're bound to repeat it.
Actually, I like to ask my guests, my spotlight authors, I like to ask what one bit of advice you would give to new or aspiring authors. And I think that was actually perfect advice right there to,
Yes.
record the moments, keep a journal, write down your thoughts and your feelings, because as it did for you, it lends to your stories. And it's not only, great to just simply have for yourself, but it's great for you as an artist for the craft. So I love that advice.
It's as we said before, it's a journey.
Yes, absolutely. Record the journey.
It's actually therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if you've gone through something that's difficult, for example, if you write about it, you don't have to share it with anybody, but just let it come out in words or painting.
Right.
Sometimes it makes you feel better just to paint something that will reflect how you feel, or you won't even know what's going to come out, like it didn't with these paintings that I showed you. I didn't know what was going to come out. It was there, it came, but it's a release. Instead of keeping it inside, it's a release. So it's therapy if you have an issue, but you don't have to have an issue. Just to think about the next generation learning from you, even if it's your own family.
Right.
It's okay. It doesn't have to be the world.
Beautiful advice, wise, wise words right there. So tell everyone where they can find you, your books, if you have any appearances coming up. What's the best way to find you and your work? There you go. I love it.
Literarylady.com.
Beautiful. Perfect. Yes.
So if you go to literarylady.com, it tells about my appearances. It's going to tell about what we're doing right now. That'll go in there when it's available. And you know, you can spy on me and get in touch. And also I want you to know, if anybody's watching, to know my books are available from Literary Lady, directly from me. They're on Amazon, yes. Not only will I know that you bought from me, but you'll get the book signed by me and you'll get it at a discount. I sell it for less than Amazon.com does. I give a discount for anybody buying the book from literarylady.com.
Huge incentive right there. Thank you. I thank you so much for coming on the show today, and maybe down the road, if you'd like to come back on the show and talk a little bit more about that one, we would love that so much.
I would be honored.
All right, guys, thank you for watching the show today. This was Dr. Patricia Daly Lipe, and she is a phenomenal, phenomenal author and has some great stories there. So head over to theliterarylady.com and go check them out. And we will see you in the next episode. Take care, guys.
Thank you.